Hi, my name is Olivia, and welcome back to my channel. Today I wanted to review It by Stephen King. And as always, this discussion is going to be completely spoiler-free, so let's get into the video. It is set in Maine in the town of Derry, and it follows two different timelines. The first timeline is a group of children growing up in Derry as some strange things start happening in the town, and various children start to go missing and later turn up dead. The second timeline follows the same group of individuals 28 years later, and they've all scattered throughout the country and continued on with their lives. But when mysterious things start happening in Derry once again, they all decide to return to the town, and the book follows them trying to figure out what's going on and how they can stop it. Admittedly, I haven't read very many of Stephen King's books to date, but that's something that I'm actively trying to change and work on. And I think I'm actually going to do a Stephen King readathon in a few weeks and try to vlog the whole experience. But this was only my second or third Stephen King book that I'd picked up, and I picked it up right around the time that It Chapter 2, the movie adaptation, was coming out in theaters. I'm a huge fan of horror books and movies, so this seemed like a logical thing to pick up, and I definitely wanted to make sure that I read it before watching the movie. Before heading into this book, I vaguely knew that it involved a clown in a sewer and some children going missing, but I didn't really know much more above and beyond that. And I think that was one of the best ways to go into this book. I have to say, this one far exceeded my expectations. It was chilling, scary, and downright horrifying at times, which is exactly what I look for within the horror genre. It's been a pretty long time since a book has managed to evoke this level of terror and panic in me, and it was kind of refreshing to read a horror book that was actually truly horrifying. It was definitely a read that made my palms sweat and my heart race as I was trying to read as quickly as I could to figure out what happened next to each of the characters. I feel like I can't review this book without addressing how absolutely massive it is. I read the Kindle book, but all of the copies on Goodreads have over 1,000 pages, some reaching as far as 1,100 or 1,200 pages in total. The length of this book alone was a little bit intimidating before I picked it up, but I have to admit that I flew through this one and read it within the span of about 23 to 24 hours. I must say there were a few non-essential scenes, conversations, details, and backgrounds that we didn't really need to know as readers, and that didn't add a ton to the storyline, but I can appreciate what Stephen King was aiming for in writing a book that's this length. I enjoyed reading all of these scenes and getting some extra insights into the characters, their backstory, and some of the history of the town of Derry. I think it really added some depth to most of the characters, and it really helped me grow attached to some of them and really sympathize with what they were going through. And I don't think it would have had the same effect if this information was given a sentence or two, instead of full scenes or full passages describing what happened. While these scenes could have been removed without significantly altering the sequence of events, I think they added so much more to the story, and that warranted their inclusion in the book. These scenes definitely contributed to the world building, the character development and character arcs, and the complexity of the story overall. And I certainly appreciated them, but I could see how other readers wouldn't value them as much. Had these portions of the book not been included, I likely wouldn't have been so invested in the plot or so attached to each of the characters. So for me, this was definitely a positive, and I think it's rare that we get to see this level of character development and character growth within a single book. On a similar note, the backstory of each character was incredibly well developed and also very well explained. You weren't left in the dark about many things, and I think it worked well for this book in particular. This definitely helped me as a reader to rationalize some of the decisions and thought processes that each character was following. And I think without all of this development, it would have been hard to understand where each individual was coming from. This set the stage for some very detailed and intricate character arcs throughout the novel, which wasn't something that I was expecting within the horror genre, but it worked very, very well in this case. This also helped me feel like I really got to know each and every one of the characters, and it brought them to life, giving them a three-dimensional quality that made them much more realistic in my eyes. I also appreciated that King has absolutely zero qualms about writing very despicable, flawed characters, and this also helped to add some depth to the story overall. Moving on to talking about the narration and the flashing back and forth between the two different timelines, which are separated by the span of 28 years. Initially, alternating back and forth between these flashbacks and present scenes was very jarring and uncomfortable to read because I hadn't quite made the connection between where each character started off as a child and where they ended up as an adult about 30 years later. Many of these individuals had changed drastically, so it was really hard to reconcile these apparent differences. Understandably, everyone changes over the course of 3 decades, but at the beginning of the book, you don't have the chance to see how they progress from point A to point B. This became less and less of a problem as the book continued, as you gradually started to learn more information about each individual, and the various pieces started to fall into place. After I had finished reading and looked back on the earlier portions of the book, I think this was a very good narrative choice from King's perspective. I don't think I would have enjoyed this book as much if King had separated out the 2 timelines and kept them completely separate. So starting off with the entire tale from start to finish of these individuals as children, and then transitioning to 28 years later and recounting the whole story of them as adults and returning to Derry. So while this wasn't something that I appreciated at the very beginning of the book, it was something that I grew to appreciate later on and even after I'd finished reading. It definitely helped to add to some of the mystery and suspense, where you were kept in the dark a little bit about what exactly had transpired and how it affected each of these characters. Additionally, the horror aspects of this book were spot on for me, and it really hit home with drawing on some of these childhood fears and actually making me terrified of them once again. Stephen King has a way of rendering fear almost tangible, and it was a difficult read to get through in that sense, and it made this one a little bit difficult to get through at times. Some of these scenes were really tough to read because they were so horrifying. But from the perspective of a thriller, it certainly did not disappoint. This was exactly what I was looking for, and I was really satisfied with the balance between some humorous, more lighthearted scenes and the chilling, truly terrifying scenes. It was even more frightening to read some of these scenes from the perspective of children and hearing sort of their inner monologue and thoughts, and I think that was one of the greatest strengths of the horror aspects of this book. A few of these scenes definitely keep me up at night, and I am still thinking about them to this day. The only reason that this wasn't a 5-star read for me was a particular scene at the very end of the book, at the end of the original battle, when all of the characters are still children. Without getting into any spoilers, this scene to me was completely irrelevant and unnecessary, and it definitely rubbed me the wrong way and was pretty off-putting. I didn't understand the rationalization that King used for including it in the book. And there were so many other alternatives that I thought of even that would have been a better resolution to this portion of the book. All of these alternate endings would have had a very similar, if not identical, effect on the remainder of the storyline. And I much would have preferred seeing one of these executed instead of what we got. This scene also seemed to feature quite a few of the characters acting very out of character for themselves. And it was hard to reconcile the characters that we'd spent the past 1,000 pages reading about with the individuals in this scene. There just seemed to be a very big disconnect there that was never fully explained. After reading and watching a few reviews, it seems like I wasn't the only person that didn't agree with or appreciate this scene, which suggests that it's probably a widespread issue and was a poor resolution to this particular storyline. Overall, I gave this a 4 out of 5 stars. And that wraps up my review of It by Stephen King. Let me know down in the comments if you've read It, what you thought of it, and if you have any other Stephen King recommendations that I should pick up. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in my next video.